There is a room in every family. You know the one. It has no door that closes properly, no light that ever quite reaches the corners. And in that room, someone learned very young, before they had words for it, that their feelings were too much, that their softness was a weakness to be exploited, that love in that house came with a price tag written in invisible ink. If you are in this room right now, even in memory, even for a second, I am not here to comfort you. I am here to tell you that the very sensitivity they punished you for is about to become the most dangerous weapon in the world. Not dangerous to others, dangerous to the lie. Because the year ahead does not belong to the loudest voice in that house. It does not belong to the one who never apologized, who rewrote history at the dinner table, who made you feel crazy for noticing what your own eyes saw. It belongs to you, the one who felt everything, said nothing for years, and is now finally done staying quiet. Sit with that for a moment. Not the anger, not yet, just the recognition. Something in you has been keeping score for a very long time. And something in you is tired of being the only one who remembers. I want to speak to you now, the way one speaks in the middle of the night, when the house is asleep and the mask can finally come off, not as a performer standing at a podium, but as someone who has walked into the same dark forest you have walked into, and who came back changed, and who is telling you, with complete seriousness, that you are standing at the edge of something enormous. We are not going to talk today about positivity. I do not trust positivity that has not first walked through the fire. We are going to talk about the psyche, your psyche, and about a particular kind of person who has haunted the corridors of your family, your friendships, perhaps your marriage, and about the century-old truth that explains why you have felt your whole life like the only sane person in a house of mirrors. Let me begin with a confession that is not really a confession, because every empath already knows it in their bones. You did not imagine it. The coldness was real. The way love was rationed like a scarce resource, given only when you performed correctly, withdrawn the moment you had a need of your own. That was real. The gaslighting, the sudden rage over nothing, the charm that could turn a room and then turn on you in private, that was real. For years, perhaps decades, you have doubted your own perception because someone taught you systematically, patiently, cruelly that your perception was the problem. This is the first thing I want to say to you, and I want you to let it land somewhere deep. Your perception was never the problem. Your perception was the threat. Now, why does that matter? Why does it matter enough to build an entire year, an entire turning point in your life around it? Because there's an ancient architecture inside every human mind, and once you understand that architecture, you will never again mistake a wound for a personality flaw of your own. Every psyche wears a mask. The Greeks called it persona, literally, the mask an actor wore on stage so the voice could sound through. We all wear one. It is not evil to have a persona. It is how we function in society, how we present a coherent self to the world, instead of spilling our chaos onto every stranger we meet. But there is a kind of person, and you have met them. You may have been raised by one, you may have married one, for whom the mask is not a garment, it is the entire house. There is no one home behind it. The persona has swallowed the person. This is the architecture of what you have been calling, in the language of our age, the narcissist. But I want to take you underneath that word, because the word alone will not save you. Underneath the grandiosity, underneath the charisma, underneath the cruelty dressed as honesty, and the coldness dressed as strength, there is an unbearable emptiness. A person who never learned, usually because it was never modeled, usually because they too grew up in a room with no door that closed properly, that they could be loved for what they actually were, so they became instead a magnificent performance of what they thought would be loved. And a performance, however magnificent, is always hungry. It requires an audience. It requires supply. It requires someone standing just off stage, applauding, absorbing the overflow, forgiving the unforgivable again and again, because someone has to hold what the performer cannot hold themselves. That someone was you. This is not a coincidence, and I want to be very precise here, because I am not interested in comfortable stories, only true ones. The empath and the narcissist are not opposites who happened to collide. They are two halves of a broken mirror that fit together with terrible precision. One learned to project every unwanted, unbearable part of themselves outward, refusing ever to look inward. The other learned, usually as a small child, in that same dim room, to absorb whatever was projected onto them, because absorbing it was safer than resisting it, because a small child cannot survive open war with the giants who feed them. So you became a container. You became, without ever being asked, the place where the family's unspoken pain went to be silently digested, so that everyone else could keep pretending the house was fine. Do you understand now why you are exhausted in a way that sleep does not fix? You have been doing psychological labor since before you could tie your own shoes. But here is where I ask you to stop, because there is a temptation, once a person understands this architecture, to simply flip the story, to go from I am the problem to they are pure evil and I am pure victim, and to stay there comfortably for the rest of their life. I will not let you do that, because it is a smaller cage built to look like freedom. The narcissist did not fall from the sky as a fully formed villain. Somewhere behind that armor is a wound so old and so unprocessed that it calcified into a personality. This does not excuse what was done to you. Understanding is not the same as excusing. But if you cannot hold both truths at once, that you were genuinely harmed, and that the one who harmed you is also, underneath the performance, a wounded and frightened human being who never individuated past the age of 5, then you will spend your whole life fighting a monster, when what you actually need to do is something far harder and far more powerful. You need to stop fighting the monster and start becoming a whole person in a family that only knows how to relate to fragments. This is the real confrontation, not the shouting match you have rehearsed in the shower 1,000 times, not the perfect speech where they finally understand and apologize, and everyone weeps, and the family heals in a single afternoon. That fantasy, and I say this with tenderness, because I have held that fantasy myself. That fantasy is a trap. It keeps you waiting for a moment of validation that a person without the capacity for self-reflection is constitutionally unable to give you. You are waiting at a well that has no water, and every year you wait is a year of your one. Irreplaceable's life spent negotiating with an empty room. The confrontation that actually changes something does not happen across the dinner table. It happens inside you. First, in the dark, alone, when you finally stop asking, "How do I get them to see me?" and start asking, "What have I refused to see in myself?" Because seeing it would mean admitting how much this has cost me. I want you to hear this next part slowly, because it is the hinge on which everything I am telling you turns. Every psyche has a shadow, the part of ourselves we have exiled because it was unacceptable to the people who raised us, or to the culture we grew up in, or to the fragile self-image we built to survive. The narcissist's shadow is enormous and entirely unclaimed. That is precisely why it must be projected onto everyone around them, why they need someone else to carry their rage, their shame, their emptiness, so they never have to feel it themselves. But you, the empath, the sensitive one, the one who absorbed everything, you have a shadow too. And I promise you, it is not made of malice. It is made of the rage you were never allowed to express. It is made of the boundaries you were taught were selfish. It is made of the anger you swallowed so many times that you began to mistake swallowing it for virtue. This is the wound beneath the wound. You were not just harmed by the narcissist. You were shaped over years into someone who believes that self-erasure is the price of love. And no year, no confrontation, no perfectly worded letter will heal that until you are willing to meet your own shadow, your own buried anger, your own capacity for a firm and unapologetic no, and stop being afraid that owning it will turn you into the very thing you fled. You will not become them. I want to say that plainly, because I know the fear sits underneath so much of your hesitation. The narcissist's defining feature is not that they have a shadow. Everyone has a shadow. Their defining feature is that they refuse to look at it, refuse to own it, refuse to ever say, "I was wrong, and I see now what that cost you." The moment you are willing to look at your own darkness honestly, your resentment, your exhaustion, your fury, even your own moments of coldness toward people who did not deserve it, the moment you can hold that without flinching and without collapsing into shame, you have already done something they may never, in this lifetime, be capable of. You have begun to integrate, and integration, not niceness, is the actual definition of psychological health. Now let me tell you Why this particular year matters, because I do not believe in astrology and I do not believe in magic dates, but I do believe deeply in cycles, in the way a culture, like an individual, moves through periods of repression and periods of reckoning. For decades, the family was treated as sacred simply by virtue of being the family. To question a parent, to name a pattern, to say the word abuse about anything that happened inside four walls with a shared last name was treated as betrayal. Silence was called loyalty. Suffering was called respect. An entire civilization built its emotional architecture on the assumption that blood erases responsibility. That assumption is dying. You can feel it dying. You can feel it in the quiet, exhausted honesty, spreading through an entire generation who are naming, often for the first time in their family's history, what was actually happening in that house. This is not weakness. This is not oversensitivity. Whatever that word has been twisted to mean by people who benefit from your silence. This is the collective unconscious itself, pushing something long buried up toward the light, the way a body finally expels a splinter it has carried for years. And you, the empath, the one who always felt too much in a family that demanded you feel nothing, you are not behind this shift. You are the leading edge of it. Your sensitivity, which was pathologized as a flaw for the entirety of your childhood, is precisely the instrument the coming years require. The world does not need more armor right now. It needs more people who can feel the truth of a room and have the courage to say it out loud. This is why I say the year ahead belongs to you. Not because life is about to become easy. It will not, but because the particular gift you were shamed for is finally becoming legible as a gift rather than a liability. The capacity to sense what is unspoken, the capacity to feel someone else's pain as though it were your own, the capacity to notice the crack beneath the performance long before anyone else in the room does. That capacity, wielded consciously instead of unconsciously, is not weakness. It is a form of sight most people never develop, because developing it requires exactly the kind of suffering you did not choose but were given anyway. But sight alone is not enough. A person can see clearly and still stay in the same room, absorbing the same poison for the rest of their life. Seeing must become choosing, and choosing, for the empath raised in a house of unclaimed shadow, is the single hardest psychological act there is, because it requires you to disappoint someone whose approval you were trained from your very first memory to need in order to feel real. So let us speak honestly about confrontation, because I do not want you walking out of this moment imagining that I am telling you to go start a war at Thanksgiving. Confrontation is not a scene. It is a stance. It is the decision made quietly and then defended fiercely that you will no longer perform the role assigned to you in someone else's unresolved drama. Sometimes that stance requires words spoken directly, clearly, without apology, to the person who hurt you. And if you choose that path, I want you to choose it not because you expect them to finally understand, but because you refuse to spend one more year of your life in a silence that was never yours to keep. Speak it for you. Speak it because a self that has been silenced for 30 years deserves, at minimum, to hear its own voice say the true thing out loud, even into a room that will not receive it well. But sometimes, and this needs to be said with equal weight, the bravest confrontation is not a conversation at all. Sometimes it is distance. Sometimes it is the phone call you do not return. Sometimes it is the holiday you do not attend, the invitation you decline without explaining yourself for the 40th time, the boundary you hold even while your whole body screams that holding it makes you a bad daughter, a bad son, a bad sibling, a bad person. I need you to understand something the culture rarely says plainly. You are allowed to protect your one, irreplaceable life from people who have shown you repeatedly exactly who they are. Believing them the first time is not cynicism. It is finally, believing your own eyes. There will be people, and some of them will be inside your own family, and some of them will be inside your own head, wearing the voice of a parent, long after that parent has left the room, who will tell you that you are cruel for stepping back, that you are dramatic, that real love endures anything. I want you to notice something about that argument. It is always, without exception, made by the person who benefits from your endurance, never by the person doing the enduring. Real love is not the capacity to tolerate infinite harm. Real love, even toward the people who raised us, includes the sober recognition that closeness is not owed simply because it once existed. You can love someone and still refuse to keep bleeding for them. You can grieve a relationship and still walk away from it. These are not contradictions. They are what maturity actually looks like, stripped of the fairy tale. I want to talk now about the family system itself, because the empath rarely suffers alone inside it. In almost every family shaped by an unclaimed, unintegrated shadow at its center, roles emerge the way roles emerge in any theater production, whether anyone auditioned for them or not. There is the golden child who reflects back the parent's grandiosity and is rewarded for it, who may not even realize for years that their comfort was purchased with someone else's suffering. There is the scapegoat who carries the family's disowned shame, who is punished not for what they did, but for what they represent. Usually the truth no one else will speak. And there is you, the empath, who often moves between these roles, sometimes praised, sometimes blamed, always tasked with managing the emotional temperature of a house that was never yours to regulate. If you were the scapegoat, hear me now, the blame was never earned, it was assigned. A family in denial needs somewhere to put its pain, and it is always easier to name a person the problem than to name a pattern the problem, because a person can be blamed and a pattern requires the terrifying work of self-examination. You were not too sensitive, you were not too much, you were very simply the one who would not stop noticing. And if you were the one who managed everyone's feelings, who mediated every fight, who apologized on behalf of people who never apologized themselves, who became a therapist to your own parents before you were old enough to drive, I want you to grieve that, truly, not skip past it toward inspiration, but actually stop here and grieve the childhood you did not get to have because you were too busy holding a house together with your bare, small hands. That grief is not indulgent. It is the doorway. You cannot walk into the strength this year is asking of you while stepping over that child. You have to go back for her. You have to go back for him. You have to say finally to the version of yourself who absorbed everything and asked for nothing. I see what this cost you, and it was not your job, and I am sorry it took me this long to say so. This is the beginning of what I would call individuation, the long, unglamorous process of becoming a whole person instead of a fragment assigned a role by someone else's unresolved history. It is not an event. It is not a single confrontation, however powerful, however long overdue. It is a daily practice of asking, in every relationship, in every family gathering, in every moment someone tries to hand you a role you did not choose. Is this actually me, or is this the character I learned to play to survive? Individuation demands something the empath has rarely been permitted, the right to disappoint people. I want you to sit with how radical that sentence actually is for someone raised to believe their worth was measured entirely by how well they managed other people's comfort. You are allowed to disappoint your mother. You are allowed to disappoint your father. You are allowed to say the sentence that makes the table go silent and to let the silence sit there, uncorrected, unsmoothed over, because for the first time in your life, you are not going to be the one who rescues the room from its own truth. This is where the shadow work becomes not a self-help phrase, but a literal survival skill. Because when you stop managing everyone else's comfort, the discomfort does not disappear. It has to go somewhere. And for a long time, it will try to come back to you, dressed as guilt. You will feel in your body a conviction that you have done something monstrous simply by having a limit. I want you to recognize that feeling for exactly what it is. Not evidence that you are wrong, but evidence of how thoroughly you were trained. Guilt in a healthy person tells you when you have actually harmed someone. But guilt in someone raised by an unintegrated shadow often tells you nothing about your actions at all. It only tells you that someone else's comfort has been disturbed. Those are not the same thing, and learning to tell them apart in real time in your own nervous system is some of the most important work a human being can do. Let me speak now about what actually happens on the other side of this, because I do not want to leave you standing only in the difficulty of it, true as that difficulty is. Something remarkable occurs when a person finally stops absorbing what was never theirs to carry. The exhaustion that has followed you your whole life, the bone-deep tiredness that no vacation ever seemed to touch begins slowly to lift. Not because the world has become kinder, but because you have stopped volunteering your nervous system as a landfill for other people's unprocessed pain. Energy that was spent scanning every room for danger, every face for disapproval, every silence for the argument brewing beneath it, becomes available for the first time for something else entirely: your own life, your own work, your own joy, which you may have forgotten you were even permitted to feel without earning it first. This is, I think, the deepest secret hidden inside the empath's suffering. The very sensitivity that made you vulnerable to being used is the same sensitivity that, once protected and pointed with intention, becomes a form of genius. The capacity to read a room is also the capacity to create art that moves people. The capacity to feel another's pain is also the capacity to build the kind of community, the kind of work, the kind of love that people spend their whole lives searching for and never find, because it requires exactly the depth of feeling you were told your whole childhood to suppress. Nothing you felt was ever the problem. The problem was that you were feeling it in a house that could not hold it. Somewhere out there is a life, a room, a set of relationships that can hold it. Part of this year's work is having the courage to go looking for that room instead of continuing to renovate the one that was never built for you. I want to address something that will try to stop you, because it stops nearly everyone at exactly this point, and I would be doing you a disservice to pretend it will not arrive. It is the voice that says, "But what if I am wrong about all of this? What if I am the difficult one, the ungrateful one, the one who is making something out of nothing?" This voice is not a neutral judge weighing the evidence. This voice is the internalized echo of the very dynamic you are trying to leave. It formed in a house where your perceptions were consistently overridden by someone louder, someone more certain, someone whose confidence was mistaken again and again for correctness. Confidence is not evidence. Certainty is not truth. The person who never doubts themselves is not more trustworthy than the person who doubts constantly. Often it is the opposite. The narcissist's greatest weapon was never their cruelty. It was their absolute, unshakable conviction that they were right, deployed against your very reasonable, very human uncertainty. Do not mistake their confidence for proof. Do not mistake your own careful self-questioning for weakness. The fact that you keep asking whether you are the problem is, itself, powerful evidence that you are not. Because the people who are actually the problem rarely ask that question at all. I want to give you something to carry out of this moment, something more durable than motivation, because motivation fades by Tuesday, and this work will still be there on Wednesday. What I want to give you is a different relationship to the discomfort itself. Every meaningful step you take this year, every boundary held, every difficult conversation had or wisely avoided, every moment you choose your own peace over someone else's approval, is going to feel in the moment like you are doing something wrong. That feeling is not a stop sign, it is a threshold. Growth and guilt, for someone raised the way you were raised, arrive in the same nervous system sensation, and learning to walk forward anyway, learning to let the discomfort ride alongside you instead of controlling you, is the actual skill this year is asking you to build, not the absence of fear, the willingness to act with it present. I think often of how a wound becomes eventually either a scar or a wisdom. The scar closes over and hardens and becomes a kind of armor, useful, perhaps, for protection, but also numbing, also cutting you off from the very sensitivity that made you who you are. The wisdom, though, is something else entirely. The wisdom takes the exact same wound and, instead of hardening around it, learns to see through it, uses the very place where you were broken open as a lens for understanding what other people are still going through, blind to their own patterns, still asleep inside a family system they have never once questioned. You have a choice this year between hardening and seeing. I would ask you to choose seeing, even though seeing is harder, even though seeing means you cannot fully numb yourself to what happened, because seeing is the only path that turns your pain into something that can actually help someone else. Someday, the way I hope something in this very moment is helping you. And here is the final thing I want to say about the narcissist, the parent, the sibling, the partner, whoever it is who taught you that your feelings were a burden. You do not need them to change in order for your life to change. I know how much you have wanted that. I know how many years you have spent hoping that if you just explained it clearly enough, felt it deeply enough, forgave enough, endured enough, something in them would finally crack open and you would get the parent, the partner, the sibling you actually needed all along. I am not telling you that change is impossible for them. People do change, rarely, and usually only when the cost of staying the same finally exceeds the cost of looking inward. But I am telling you that your healing cannot be contingent on waiting to find out. You are allowed to become whole while they remain exactly as they are. Your wholeness is not a reward they get to grant you. It was always yours to claim. This is, in the end, what confrontation actually means. Not necessarily a raised voice across a table, though it may include that, but something far more permanent. The refusal to keep organizing your life around someone else's blindness. The decision that your own clarity, hard won and expensive as it was, matters more than their comfort. The willingness to be called difficult by people who only ever liked you when you were easy to use. You were not put in that house by accident, and I do not say that as some comforting cosmic fantasy, but as a simple observation of what suffering, metabolized rather than avoided, actually produces. Every person who has ever helped another human being out of the exact darkness they themselves once lived in, did so because they refused to let that darkness be wasted. They turned it into sight. They turned it into a hand extended towards someone still standing in the room they themselves once escaped. This is available to you too. Not immediately, not without more grief, more anger, more uncomfortable conversations, both spoken and unspoken, but available nonetheless on the other side of the work I am describing. So let this be the year you stop asking permission to take up space in your own life. Let this be the year the child who managed everyone else's feelings finally gets to have some of their own unmanaged, unapologized for, simply felt. Let this be the year you look at the wound directly, not to reopen it endlessly, but to finally close it on your own terms rather than theirs. Let this be the year your sensitivity stops being the thing you apologize for and becomes, instead, the thing you build your entire life around, because it was never the flaw they told you it was. It was always, from the very beginning, your instrument, your sight, your gift, disguised for a long time as a wound, waiting only for you to become strong enough to pick it back up and use it as it was always meant to be used. Go and use it.